First of all, thank you everyone for joining in for this discussion with Aarefa Johari. Aarefa is a journalist for the past 11 years. She is currently working with Scroll.in. She is also a feminist activist speaking out against the practice of female genital cutting, and she's the co-founder of Sahiyo. So today we'll have a discussion with Aarefa. Thank you, Aarefa, for agreeing for this talk. So she will start with what is FGM, FGC, and why do they prefer the word cutting over mutilation, and what it is, where it is performed, and why is the practice performed in Asian countries and around the world. So thank you, Aarefa, once again for this session. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you, and thanks to Sambhavna Institute for organizing this. It's a really important topic to discuss. Thanks to everybody who's joined in on Facebook and on Zoom. Basically, yeah, I'm going to begin with just what is female genital cutting, because a lot of people would have probably heard of the practice of male circumcision, which is known as khatna. Which is practiced by Muslim communities and Jewish communities, where all boys are cut at a young age. The foreskin of their penises are cut as a cultural ritual and a religious ritual. There are certain communities which also practice what they call female circumcision, which is also known as female genital cutting or mutilation, or also female khatna. And so the community that I belong to, which is the Dawoodi Bohra community, is one of the few communities in India that practices this. I think for a long time, people thought it is the only community in India which practices it. But, there are other sects of the Bohras who also practice it, smaller sects. And there are, as we discovered just a few years ago, there are also some communities in Kerala which are practicing this. So, what is female circumcision? If you look up FGM, female genital mutilation, online, you are probably going to come across a lot of articles about, African communities and cultures where, large chunks of the female genitals are cut as a cultural ritual. And this is one type of FGMC. It is basically the World Health Organization classifies this practice into 4 types based on how severe the cut is. So, what you often tend to hear of are in a few African communities that gets a lot of attention because of the most severe form, which is where they cut the labia and they cut the clitoris and they sew it up and leave a very small opening for menstruation and for urination. And that is, of course, obviously horrendous. It's life-threatening. It's, it is legitimately gets a lot of attention. But there are also less severe forms of this practice. And the community that I come from, we practice what they like to call, just mild circumcision. It's not mutilation, they'll say. Mutilation is what those Africans do, which is a very racist stand to take. But, the belief is, so they cut in our community. They say that we cut the hood or the prepuce of the clitoris. I hope that most of you listening are aware of the clitoris and what it is and where it is located. If anybody wants more of an explanation on that, maybe just put it as a question or a comment, and we can come to that at a slightly later point. But basically, it's a very important part of the genitals. It's meant for female sexual pleasure. And so the clitoris has a covering which is the hood. And they say that is what is cut. I was cut as well when I was 7 years old. That is a practice in our community. When girls are 7 years old, they are taken by women in their family, the mother or grandmother or sometimes an aunt. And they're taken to somebody who cuts them. It could be either a traditional non-medical person, some lady, like in my case, a lady who's been doing this for decades, who will basically, some excuse will be given to the child, or we're going shopping, or we're going to go out for ice cream, or something or the other. And, different children have different experiences, different memories. So some of them remember the entire thing in a lot of detail. It's very traumatic. Some may not remember a lot of detail. My memory of my khatna is quite hazy. But I do remember that, my mother, I didn't know what was happening, but I was told that, oh, it's just something is going to be cut down there. Don't worry, it won't hurt much. But it's quite frightening when some unknown person takes off your panties and starts to, get a blade between your legs. So there is a lot of fear. There is a lot of, for a lot of people, it's different types of experiences, but it can be a fearful, painful, traumatic experience. And there is no guarantee. Like, what they say is, oh, we just cut a small pinch of skin, a small, layer of tissue, nothing much. It's not a big deal. But there's no guarantee, because, when a child is that young and something so scary is happening, the child may move, the cutter may not be experienced. So yeah, there are a lot of cases where a lot more gets cut, a lot more is damaged, which is unfortunate. And I guess the next question is why this is done, right? Yeah, as you may guess, it's a cultural ritual. It's what people in the community believe is a religious ritual. It is not mentioned in the Quran. So there's a misunderstanding globally that this practice is an Islamic practice, but it's not. There are a lot of communities outside of Muslims also around the world that do practice the female circumcision. And it is not mentioned in the Quran itself. There are certain other religious texts which mention it, but there's a lot of debate about how valid those texts are, that they don't necessarily mention it as compulsory, all of that. For me as an activist, none of that matters. The point is the practice is wrong and it harms girls and women. But we had done a study. I belong to an organization called Sahiyo. We are working to end this practice, and we had done a study in 2017 where we interviewed women from the community, and we found that 80% of the women we had interviewed had been cut, and majority of them were cut not by some sort of medical, doctor or nurse, but by an untrained non-medical cutter. And majority of them did, and majority of them found it a painful experience. And we asked them what were the reasons that they have heard in their families for why this is done. And the most common reason given, I don't know if anybody has any guesses that they want to put in the comments, but the most common reason given was it's culture, tradition, religion. So basically just something that is unquestioned, just done because it's supposed to be done. That's exactly what my mother told me when I questioned her. She said, yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it. It was just something that has to be done. So we did it. And the second most common reason is that it's a means of controlling, controlling the girl's sexual urges, desires, moderating the urge with the idea of, chastity, promiscuity. It will prevent her from having premarital or extramarital affairs, which is a joke, really. And then there's other reasons, hygiene. That hygiene is actually something that, if you talk to any religious leaders, that's what they will say, that in this day and age, that yeah, that's what our scriptures say. It is meant for hygiene and purity and cleanliness, because a lot of the smegma collects in the folds of the tissue. So they say that it's more hygienic, and it prevents certain, illnesses. Again, that's not really, we don't really have proper scientific backing for that. And the idea is also spiritual purity, whatever that means. Nowadays, there are also people who will tell you that, doing khatna for girls actually will enhance her sexual pleasure, because by uncovering the clitoris, by cutting the clitoral hood, it actually will make orgasms easier for her. So it's all a lot of different simultaneous contradictory reasons given for this practice. Yeah, I mean, Mohammed, what was the next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the term medicalization of it and untrained versus unskilled older women from the community doing it. So I would also want you to clarify that point that if there is medicalization, what's the harm of even if it is done by trained people? So if you could just clarify that.
Right. No, that's a very good point because that's a huge global debate. I mean, there's a global movement against this practice, and the pushback against it from communities is that we're just going to medicalize this practice. So we acknowledge that when untrained women or untrained cutters do the cutting, it can cause a lot of problems, unsterilized environment, no training. And so if we get a doctor or a nurse, a professional to do it, they can make sure that the very minimum is cut, it's done in a sterilized environment, and therefore no harm done. So what's the big deal? But I mean, does anybody want to? I mean, as you can figure it out already, there's so many problems with this entire argument of, let's get this practice medicalized. Is that one, it is not a medical practice. There is a Hippocratic oath that doctors take where the first thing is do no harm, and you have to have consent of the person you are carrying out a procedure on. And when there is no medical need for this practice, even the WHO definition of this is it's a non-medical practice. And so how can a doctor carry out a non-medical practice? So there is an ethical conundrum for doctors themselves. And often when we try to raise this with doctors, they kind of talk about this dilemma. They say, we can come out with a statement against this saying that it's wrong, but then that will just push the practice underground. Whereas if it's medicalized, then maybe doctors can control it and make sure that no damage is done, and make sure that the practice doesn't go underground. So that's one of those debates that is happening in the globe. But I think what is really needed is a strong stand that this practice itself is wrong and it can actually cause harm, and the community needs to understand that from within.
Aarefa, you also mentioned about consent, and with the whole feminist movement, we are talking about the rights of the bodily rights of women, of children. So it's an issue about child rights, it's an issue about women's rights, and human rights of the survivors or the victims. So in that sense, there's also this whole dubious claims by many people that one is that what we believe that, as your survey also says, that there are many multiple health, mental as well as physical health impacts, consequences of this practice. But there have also been some dubious cases where they have said that because of such practices, there may be health benefits. Like you also mentioned earlier, that health and hygiene. So in case in future, if suppose if someone comes up saying that there are health benefits, but how do activists still argue on the consent and the rights of women over their bodies and controls? If you just
I mean, on the grounds of consent, it's quite simple, right? I mean, in fact, a lot of people would ask about male circumcision as well, and my take is pretty much the same, that just leave all children's genitals alone. It's not too much to ask for. Just leave it alone. It's not required. It's not needed. And if you think that something is such an important religious ritual or cultural ritual, then let somebody grow up, become an adult, and choose, understand everything from various perspectives, get information and make an informed choice about whether they want to do something for themselves or not, to their own bodies. So that, the bodily integrity of a child is important. And, we can't just, the argument from the community is always, parents have a right to give consent on behalf of children. Like for a surgery, you would give the consent, etc., etc. So the point is, there is a context to everything. And, just because parents have, make a lot of decisions for their children doesn't mean that they can harm their child. It's as simple as that. Or do something that could potentially harm the child, because a lot of people in the community today, the counter movement against us is that this is not mutilation, this is not really a harmful practice at all. And you have thousands of women signing petitions and saying, oh, this was not harmful for me, I have not faced any harm. And sure, there are a lot of women who have not faced any negative consequences, but does that mean that you dismiss the stories of the women who have faced negative consequences? Does that mean that you ignore the medical evidence that this can cause harm, and it has caused harm? And if you believe in the well-being of the community as a whole, of individuals within the community, then you should be willing to let go of a practice that has harmed so many people.
Could you also talk a little bit about there are multiple stories survivors have spoken about, and what are their lived experiences in terms of their intimacy, sexual health, and other psychological traumas? If you could just give a little bit the harm that.
So the disclaimer to that is that uh, everything is, each person's experience is personal and different for various reasons. One is there is no uniform size of the clitoris or the labia or the clitoral hood. So every child is born with their own unique size, and when a child is so small, it's hard to tell how much is actually being cut and how much damage has actually been done. Then there's the variable of how the cutting was done, in what context, how trained or untrained was the cutter, how smoothly or terribly the cutting was done, how much the child resisted or didn't resist, and that is just in terms of the physical scarring, right? So in my case, I would say that I don't think I have too much of physical scarring, although I'm not sure I have much of a clitoral hood, or I can't really figure out the damage that was done or not done, but it doesn't feel like, I don't have long lasting physical scars that it healed in a day or so. But there are a lot of people who have had very different experiences, where they have long lasting pain in that region. They have scars, they have trouble, they, for a lot of children for a long time, have trouble urinating, it burns when they pee, all of this. So there's a variety of short term and long term consequences. And again, that's just the physical. Then there is the psychological, emotional scarring, right, that can happen depending on how traumatic or not your experience was, what explanation was given to you, in what way were you prepared as a child before you were cut, and just how traumatic. Like, if you just, the optics of it are pretty much, it appears like sexual abuse, right? When your clothes are taken off, your legs are spread, and somebody takes a blade between your legs. So a lot of women we have come across remember it as sexual abuse. A lot of women, may not think of it in those terms, but for them it is something that comes with a lot of feelings of betrayal towards their mothers or grandmothers, because they feel like, okay, you were supposed to protect me, you told me never to let anybody touch me down there, and now you have taken me there, you have let this happen to me. So there's a lot of feelings of betrayal and resentment that people have towards their mothers. There is just actual trauma. We've met women who and who talk about, and then that affects sexual intimacy, right? Women who talk about just after marriage suddenly realizing that they're unable to get intimate with their partners because it brings up these memories and the trauma. So it's hard to tell what percentage and how common what type of experience is. And admittedly, there are a lot of women who have not experienced so much trauma, but it's even one is not even one is too much. So yeah, there's a variety. Like, we know people who've had to go for therapy to be able to get intimate with their partners, and people who experience pain while having sex and all of that.
So I would like Aarefa to just talk a little bit more about the Indian context, in what regions and what kind of communities. And since she belongs from the Dawoodi Bohra community, she could also give a little bit about the community and the role of men in the community in terms of this practice.
Sure, yeah. So, the Bohra community as a whole, is a sect of the Shia, is a subsect of Shia Muslims. And it's, we are largely located in India, originating from Gujarat. So in India, we are spread around Gujarat, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and then, all over. But predominantly in Western India. And then, of course, there's a huge global diaspora of the Bohras. I think half the community lives abroad. So pretty much all around the world, you will find Bohras, and they take this practice with them wherever they go. And in India, so there's the Dawoodi Bohras, which is the biggest subsect of the Bohras. And then you have the Alvi Bohras, Suleimani Bohras, Reformist Bohras, various smaller subsects. They also practice this. And in 2017, we got a tip off that it's happening in Kerala. It is happening in parts of Kerala, and we investigated, and we did find, in Calicut, Malappuram, and some of these areas, there are certain sects of certain Sunni communities that are doing this. But again, there's very little information about how widespread it is in Kerala. Clearly, it is not being done by everyone. But the reports that we had done after our investigation, that caused a lot of furor in Kerala, and actually the Kerala Health Department and their doctors and religious leaders, they actually responded very swiftly and condemned the practice. But we know that it is still happening, and there are some religious leaders who are still promoting it in Kerala. So a lot of studies need to be done on this further. So yeah, that is broadly where in India it's done. And as far as the Dawoodi Bohras are concerned, some of you might be familiar with the community, but for those who are not, it's a trading community, largely. More, the word Bohra means trader. So a lot of people in the community are quite well off and are often involved in businesses. And it's a very exclusive community. It's a community that likes to, we have our own religious head who's kind of like a pope figure. His title is Sayyidna. So it's, for the community, the word of the Sayyidna is kind of like the word of the law. And so it would be great if one day the Sayyidna can say that, we need to end this practice and stop it, because that would really help to stop the practice overnight. But as of now, we know that the Sayyidna does believe that this practice is some sort of religious obligation meant for spiritual purity. So we need to keep having a dialogue within the community to dispel that kind of belief and change the norm. The problem also with this community is that there is a lot of fear that if you raise a voice against something that's commonly, that's considered a norm in the community or a necessary aspect of the community, then you could be excommunicated. And there have been instances of excommunicating people in the past, not for this reason, not for speaking out about FGC, but for various other issues. And so the fear is quite legitimate and quite real. People don't want to upset the status quo. They, so a lot of people we find who really want this practice to end but are not able to publicly say it. And there are people who have tried to say it, and their families have been reprimanded by the people in the masjid and all of that. So it can be difficult to speak out publicly, but we do get a lot of private support. And if there's one thing I have learned as an activist, and I spoke out around 9 years ago, when I first started publicly speaking out against this practice. That time, not a lot of people in the community were voicing, their objections to this practice. But when you keep at it and you keep sharing your story, it does eventually get attention, and it does help other people share their own stories. And so since 2015, when this movement really picked up pace, now we have dozens of women in the community and men like Muhammad himself, who have spoken out against this practice and who are taking a stand and inspiring parents to say that, okay, I will not cut my daughter. So that's a positive change we are starting to see in the community, and we just need to reach a critical mass where the norm can change. So hopefully soon.
Aarefa, what are the different laws in India against? Is there a law or some kind of legal action? And if you could just compare, because generally we do a lot of comparison with the US. So what's the situation over there versus here, or in general the legal framework in India? And I heard recently that Sudan or some country have also banned it.
Right. I mean, the practice of female genital mutilation / cutting has been banned in around 40, 45 countries around the world, but India is not one of them yet. We don't have a law against this practice. There is currently a case in the Supreme Court filed by a lawyer in Delhi, and so it's a PIL, and now there are many parties to it. But essentially, whenever the case is fully heard in the Supreme Court, it's basically going to be a debate about whether this practice should be banned in India. And then there's also the community members who have filed a counter petition to this case. And their defense is that no, this is an essential religious practice, and the Constitution of India gives us the right to freedom of religion. And so we will have to see how the Supreme Court interprets this, and fingers crossed about that. There are a lot of countries, like in recent times, in Australia, in the US, there have been cases where members of the Bora community in these places have been arrested and tried for practicing FGMC on girls. There have been, in Australia, there was a conviction. In the US, for some other technical reason, there was no conviction in that case. But, it has been recognized that this practice should not have happened. So in response to the case in Australia, the religious leaders, like our Sayyidna is the head of the Bora community at a global level. So at the time, the community administration had come out with these notices addressing Bohras in countries globally where there is a law against this practice. So countries like Australia, US, a lot of European countries, Canada, etc. So wherever there is a law against FGM, Bora community members have been instructed to follow the law of that land and to not cut their daughters. But in a country like India, where there is no law, and many other countries where there is no law, they haven't bothered to tell the community not to do it. So essentially, it's like if you're a Bora girl born in India, you are not protected because there's no law. There's that aspect. That's one of the reasons why we need a law. But as an activist, I have to say that a law alone is not enough. It is simply not enough to end the practice. We have a law against domestic violence. Does that mean that there is no domestic violence in the country? We have a law against untouchability, but there's untouchability is rampant around the country, and so on and so forth. This is one of those practices that the community members holds so dear to their hearts that they will do it, and it will be underground if there is a law. So along with the law, it cannot be replaced by, you have to have a community movement. You have to have education and dialogue and be able to change the norm from within.
So, Aarefa, what do you think? How can we end this? And if you could just talk about Sahiyo and different programs that could help us or the viewers to understand what else can we do, or what are the different ways apart from the PI and the legal act?
So at Sahiyo, which is SAHIYO, it's an organization we founded around 5 years ago, and it is basically, we are working to end this practice in Asian communities. And so it's a transnational organization. We have, we have volunteers from all over the world, and we focus on outreach programs in the communities, at the ground level. So both online and offline. So, we train people on, how to have conversations with their friends and family about this. We create safe spaces for people, women and men, to come forward and bond with each other, share their own stories. We believe strongly in storytelling, so we try to do a lot of storytelling programming, which is really helps a lot of people as a form of catharsis, and also breaks the sense of isolation that you feel when you're going through a practice like this, and you have all these feelings around it. So we focus on a lot of that, and we also try to do research, and now we've been having a whole bunch of webinars since the lockdown began. So it's a variety of things that we do, and we have a strong volunteer program where people interested in volunteering can definitely go to Sahiyo's website and fill in an application form and volunteer their time to this cause.
Okay, friends, if you don't have any other questions, we can end this session. Aarefa, would you like to add something before we?
Perhaps simply, since this is something that people might feel that, it's something that happens only in one small community in India, or, it doesn't really relate to my life, and it's so barbaric, and, it to those who might feel that, oh, this is outlandish, and it's, doesn't happen in my community, and it's a terrible thing. I just want to talk a bit about social norms that, as horrific as female khatna might sound, it is a social norm. For the community that practices it, it's something that they do because they're not doing it out. And that is actually a huge reason why a lot of activists choose not to use the word mutilation, and they prefer the word cutting over mutilation, because the community does not, parents don't choose to cut their daughters with an intention of harming them. There's no intention to mutilate. And so when you use that term with the community all the time, you're just alienating them and making them more defensive, and they're not likely to listen to you. And so we prefer using the word cutting, and it's more neutral. And essentially it's a social norm that's done for cultural reasons, and people don't question it, because what are social norms? Just things that people do without questioning. And every community has social norms, and a lot of social norms are patriarchal. So even though it's not directly comparable, look at menstrual taboos, look at various other patriarchal rituals that are followed in all our communities. And I think the way to approach them is pretty much the same, that we need to have conversations, we need to engage in dialogue with our friends and family to be able to change mindsets around these ideas. We can relate what may seem like an unrelatable practice within your own community. You can actually relate it to other social norms in your community and then talk about it.
Thank you, Aarefa. Thank you, friends, for joining in, and immense respect and salute your courage. Aarefa, thank you once again for doing this talk with us.